Section 2 of Self-Help. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Self-Help with Illustrations of Conduct and Perseverance by Samuel Smiles. Chapter 1. Self-Help. National and Individual Part 1. Quote, "The worth of a state, in the long run, is the worth of the individuals composing it." Unquote. By John Stuart Mill. Quote, "We put too much faith in systems and look too little to men." Unquote. B. Disraeli. Quote, "Heaven helps those who help themselves," unquote, is a well-tried maxim, embodying in a small compass the results of vast human experience. The spirit of self-help is the root of all genuine growth in the individual and exhibited in the lives of many. It constitutes the true source of national vigor and strength. Help from without is often enfeebling in its effects, but help from within invariably invigorates. Whatever is done for men or classes to a certain extent takes away the stimulus and necessity of doing for themselves, and where men are subjected to over-guidance and over-government, the inevitable tendency is to render them comparatively helpless. Even the best institutions can give a man no active help. Perhaps the most they can do is to leave him free to develop himself and improve his individual condition. But in all times, men have been prone to believe that their happiness and well-being were to be secured by means of institutions rather than by their own conduct. Hence the value of legislation as an agent in human advancement has usually been much overestimated. To constitute the millionth part of a legislature by voting for one or two men once in 3 or 5 years, however conscientiously this duty may be performed, but little active influence upon any man's life and character. Moreover, it is every day becoming more clearly understood that the function of government is negative and restrictive, rather than positive and active, being resolvably principally into protection of life, liberty, and property. Laws wisely administered will secure men in the enjoyment of the fruits of their labor, whether of mind or body, at a comparatively small personal sacrifice, but no laws, however stringent, can make the idle industrious, the thriftless provident, or the drunken sober. Such reforms can only be effected by means of individual action, economy, and self-denial, by better habits rather than by greater rights. The government of a nation is usually found to be but the reflex of the individuals composing it. The government that is ahead of the people will be inevitably dragged down to their level, as the government that is behind them will, in the long run, be dragged up. In the order of nature, the collective character of a nation will as surely find its befitting results in its law and government, as water finds its own level. The noble people will be nobly ruled, and the ignorant and corrupt ignobly. Indeed, all experiences serves to prove that the worth and strength of a state depend far less upon the form of its institutions than upon the character of its men. For the nation is only an aggregate of individual conditions, and civilization itself is but a question of the personal improvement of the men, women, and children of whom society is composed. National progress is the sum of individual industry, energy, and uprightness, as national decay is of individual idleness, selfishness, and vice. While we are accustomed to decry as great social evils, will, for the most part, be found to be but the outgrowth of man's own perverted life, and though we may endeavor to cut them down and extirpate them by means of law, They will only spring up again with fresh luxuriance in some other form unless the conditions of personal life and character are radically improved. If this view be correct, then it follows that the highest patriotism and philanthropy consist not so much in altering laws and modifying institutions, as in helping and stimulating men to elevate and improve themselves by their own free and independent individual action. It may be of comparatively little consequence how a man is governed from without, whilst everything depends upon how he governs himself from within. The greatest slave is not he who is ruled by a despot, great though that evil be, but he who is the thrall of his own moral ignorance, selfishness, and vice. Nations who are thus enslaved at heart cannot be freed by any mere changes of masters or of institutions, and so long as the fatal delusion prevails that liberty solely depends upon and consists in government, so long will such changes, no matter at what cost they may be effected, have as little practical and lasting result as the shifting of the figures in a phantasmagoria. The solid foundations of liberty must rest upon individual character, which is also the only sure guarantee for social security and national progress. John Stuart Mill truly observes that, quote, even despotism does not produce its worst effects so long as individuality exists under it, and whatever crosses individuality is despotism by whatever name it be called, unquote. Old fallacies as to human progress are constantly turning up. Some call for Caesars, others for nationalities, and others for acts of parliament. We are to wait for Caesars, and when they are found, quote, happy the people who recognize and follow them, unquote. This doctrine shortly means everything for the people, nothing by them, a doctrine which, if taken as a guide, must, by destroying the free conscience of a community, speedily prepare the way for any form of despotism. Caesarism is human idolatry in its worst form, a worship of mere power, as degrading in its effects as the worship of mere wealth would be. A far healthier doctrine to inculcate among the nations would be that of self-help, and so soon as it is thoroughly understood and carried into action, Caesarism will be no more. The two principles are directly antagonistic, and what Victor Hugo said of the pen and the sword alike applies to them. Cese tuera cela, this will kill that. The power of nationalities and acts of parliament is also a prevalent superstition. What William Dargan, one of Ireland's truest patriots, said at the closing of the first Dublin industrial expedition may be well quoted now. Quote, to tell the truth, he said, I never heard the word independence mentioned that my own country and my own fellow townsmen did not occur to my mind. I have heard a great deal about the independence that we were to get from this, that, and the other place, and of the great expectations we were to have from persons from other countries coming amongst us. Whilst I value as much as any man the great advantages that must result to us from that intercourse, I've always been deeply impressed with the feeling that our industrial independence is dependent upon ourselves. I believe that with simple industry and careful exactness in the utilization of our energies, we never had a fairer chance nor a brighter prospect than the present. We have made a step, but perseverance is the great agent of success. And if we but go on zealously, I believe in my conscience that in a short period we shall arrive at a position of equal comfort, of equal happiness, and of equal independence with that of any other people, unquote. All nations have been made what they are by the thinking and the working of many generations of men. Patient and persevering laborers in all ranks and conditions of life, cultivators of the soil and explorers of the mine, inventors and discoverers, manufacturers, mechanics, and artisans, poets, philosophers, and politicians, all have contributed towards the grand result, one generation building upon another's labors and carrying them forward to still higher stages. This constant succession of noble workers, the artisans of civilization, has served to create order out of chaos in industry, science, and art, and the living race has thus, in the course of nature, become the inheritor of the rich estate provided by the skill and industry of our forefathers, which is placed in our hands to cultivate and to hand down, not only unimpaired but improved to our successors. The spirit of self-help, as exhibited in the energetic action of individuals, has in all times been a marked feature in the English character and furnishes the true measure of our power as a nation. Rising above the heads of the mass, there will always to be found a series of individuals distinguished beyond others who commanded their public homage, but our progress has also been owing to multitudes of smaller and less known men. Though only the generals' names may be remembered in the history of any great campaign, it has been in a great measure through the individual valor and heroism of the privates that victories have been won, and life too is a soldier's battle, unquote. Men in the ranks having in all times been amongst the greatest of workers. Many are the lives of men unwritten, which have nevertheless as powerfully influenced civilization and progress as the more fortunate great, whose names are recorded in biography. Even the humblest person, who sets before his fellows an example of industry, sobriety, and upright honesty of purpose in life, has a present as well as a future influence upon the well-being of his country, for his life and character pass unconsciously into the lives of others and propagate good example for all time to come. Daily experience shows that it is energetic individualism which produces the most powerful effects upon the life and action of others, and really constitutes the best practical education. Schools, academies, and colleges give but the merest beginnings of culture in comparison with it. Far more influential is the life education daily given in our homes, in the streets, behind counters, in workshops, at the loom and the plow, in counting houses and manufactories, and in the busy haunts of men. This is that finishing instruction as members of society, which Schiller designated, quote, the education of the human race, unquote, consisting in action, conduct, self-culture, self-control, all that tends to discipline a man, truly and fit him for the proper performance of the duties and business of life. A kind of education not to be learnt from books or acquired by any amount of mere literary training. With his usual weight of words, Bacon observes that, quote, studies teach not their own use, but that is a wisdom without them, and above them, won by observation, unquote. A remark that holds true of actual life as well as the cultivation of the intellect itself. For all experiences serve to illustrate and enforce the lesson that a man perfects himself by work more than by reading, that it is life rather than literature, action rather than study, and character rather than biography, which tend perpetually to renovate mankind. Biographies of great, but especially of good men, are nevertheless most instructive and useful, as helps, guides, and incentives to others. Some of the best are almost equivalent to gospels, teaching high living, high thinking, and energetic action for their own and the world's good. The valuable examples which they furnish of the power of self-help, of patient purpose, resolute working, and steadfast integrity, issuing in the formation of truly noble and manly character, exhibit in language not to be misunderstood what is in the power of each to accomplish for himself, and eloquently illustrate the efficacy of self-respect and self-reliance in enabling men of even the humblest rank to work out for themselves on honorable competency and solid reputation. Great men of science, literature, and art, apostles of great thoughts and lords of the great heart, have belonged to no exclusive class nor rank in life. They have come alike from colleges, workshops, and farmhouses, from the huts of poor men and the mansions of the rich. Some of God's greatest apostles have come from, quote, the ranks, unquote. The poorest have sometimes taken the highest places, nor have difficulties, apparently the most insuperable, proved obstacles in their way. These very difficulties, in many instances, would ever seem to have been their best helpers, by invoking their powers of labor and endurance, and stimulating into life faculties which might otherwise have lain dormant. The instances of obstacles thus surmounted and of triumphs thus achieved are indeed so numerous as almost to justify the proverb that, quote, with will one can do anything, unquote. Take, for instance, the remarkable fact that from the barber shop came Jeremy Taylor, the most poetical of divines, Sir Richard Arkwright, the inventor of the spinning jenny, and the founder of the cotton manufacture, Lord Tenterden, one of the most distinguished of Lord Chief Justices, and Turner, the greatest among landscape painters. No one knows to certainty what Shakespeare was, but it is unquestionable that he sprang from a humble rank. His father was a butcher and grazier, and Shakespeare himself is supposed to have been in early life a woolcomber, whilst others aver that he was an usher in a school and afterwards a Scrivener's clerk. He truly seems to have been, quote, not one, but all mankind's epitome, unquote. For such is the accuracy of his sea phrases that a naval writer alleges that he must have been a sailor, whilst a clergyman infers from internal evidence in his writings that he was probably a parson's clerk, and a distinguished judge of horseflesh insists that he must have been a horse dealer. Shakespeare was certainly an actor, and in the course of his life, quote, played many parts, unquote, gathering his wonderful stores of knowledge from a wide field of experience and observation. In any event, he must have been a close student and a hard worker, and to this day his writings continue to exercise a powerful influence on the formation of English character. The common class of day laborers has given us Brindley the engineer, Cook the navigator, and Burns the poet. Masons and bricklayers can boast of Ben Jonson, who worked at the building of Lincoln's Inn, with a trowel in his hand and a book in his pocket, Edwards and Telford the engineers, Hugh Miller the geologist, and Alan Cunningham the writer and sculptor, whilst among distinguished carpenters we find the names of Inigo Jones the architect, Harrison the chronometer maker, John Hunter the physiologist, Romney and Opie the painters, Professor Lee the orientalist, and John Gibson the sculptor. From the weaver class have sprung Simpson the mathematician, Bacon the sculptor, the two milliners, Adam Walker, John Foster, Wilson the ornithologist, Dr. Livingstone the missionary traveler, and Tannahill the poet. Shoemakers have given us Sir Cloudesley Shovel, the great admiral, Sturgeon the electrician, Samuel Drew the essayist, Gifford the editor of the Quarterly Review, Bloomfield the poet, and William Carey the missionary, whilst Morrison, another laborious missionary, was a maker of shoe lasts. Within the last few years, a profound naturalist has been discovered in the person of a shoemaker at Banff, named Thomas Edwards, who, whilst maintaining himself by his trade, has devoted his leisure to the study of natural science in all its branches. His researches in connection with the small crustacea have been rewarded by the discovery of a new species to which the name Prunella edwardsi has been given by naturalists, nor have tailors been undistinguished. John Stow, the historian, worked at the trade during some part of his life. Jackson the painter made clothes until he reached manhood. The brave Sir John Hawkeswood, who so greatly distinguished himself at Poitiers and was knighted by Edward III for his valour, was in early life apprenticed to a London tailor, Admiral Hobson, who broke the boom at Vigo in 1702, belonged to the same calling. He was working as a tailor's apprentice near Bonchurch in the Isle of Wight, when the news flew through the village that a squadron of men of war was sailing off the island. He sprang from the shopboard and ran down with his comrades to the beach to gaze upon the glorious sight. The boy was suddenly inflamed with the ambition to be a sailor, and springing into a boat, he rowed off to the squadron, gained the admiral's ship, and was accepted as a volunteer. Years after, he returned to his native village full of honors, and dined off bacon and eggs in the cottage where he had worked as an apprentice. But the greatest tailor of all is unquestionably Andrew Johnson, the present President of the United States, a man of extraordinary force and character and vigor of intellect. In his great speech at Washington, when describing himself as having begun his political career as an alderman and run through all the branches of the legislature, a voice in the crowd cried, quote, "From a tailor up," unquote. It was characteristic of Johnson to take the intended sarcasm in good part, and even to turn it to account. Quote, "Some gentleman says I have been a tailor. That does not disconcert me in the least, for when I was a tailor, I had the reputation of being a good one, and making close fits. I was always punctual with my customers, and always did good work," unquote. Cardinal Wolsey, Defoe, Akenside, and Kirke White were the sons of butchers. Bunyan was a tinkerer, and Joseph Lancaster a basket-maker. Among the great names identified with the invention of the steam engine are those of Newcomen, Watt, and Stephenson. The first a blacksmith, the second a maker of mathematical instruments, and the third an engine fireman. Huntingdon, the preacher, was originally a coal heaver, and Bewick, the father of wood engraving, a coal miner. Dodsley was a footman, and Holcraft a groom. Baffin, the navigator, began his seafaring career as a man before the mast, and Sir Cloudesley Shovel as a cabin boy. Herschel played the oboe in a military band. Chantrey was a journeyman carver, Etty a journeyman printer, and Sir Thomas Lawrence, the son of a tavern keeper. Michael Faraday, the son of a blacksmith, was in early life apprenticed to a bookbinder, and worked that trade until he reached his 22nd year. He now occupies the very first rank as a philosopher, excelling even his master, Sir Humphrey Davy, in the art of lucidly expounding the most difficult and abstruse points in natural science. Among those who have given the greatest impulse to the sublime science of astronomy we find Copernicus, the son of a Polish baker, Kepler, the son of a German public-house keeper, and himself the garçon de cabaret. D'Alembert, a foundling picked up one winter's night on the steps of the church of Saint-Jean-le-Rond at Paris, and brought up by the wife of a glazier, and Newton and Laplace, the one the son of a small freeholder near Grantham, the other the son of a poor peasant of Beaumont-en-Auge near Honfleur. Notwithstanding their comparatively adverse circumstances in early life, these distinguished men achieved a solid and enduring reputation by the exercise of their genius, which all the wealth in the world could have not purchased. The very possession of wealth might indeed have proved an obstacle greater even than the humble means to which they were born. The father of Lagrange, the astronomer and mathematician, held the office of the Treasurer of War at Turin. But having ruined himself by speculations, his family were reduced to comparative poverty. To this circumstance, Lagrange was in after life accustomed partly to attribute his own fame and happiness. Quote, "Had I been rich," said he, I should probably not have become a mathematician, unquote. The sons of clergymen and ministers of religion generally have particularly distinguished themselves in our country's history. Amongst them we find the names of Drake and Nelson, celebrated in naval heroism, of Wollaston, Young, Playfair and Bell in science, of Wren, Reynolds, Wilkson and Wilkie in art, of Thurlow and Campbell in law, and of Addison, Thomson, Goldsmith, Coleridge, and Tennyson in literature. Lord Hardinge, Colonel Edwards, and Major Hodgson, so honorably known in Indian warfare, were also the sons of clergymen. Indeed, the Empire of England in India was won and held chiefly by men of the middle class, such as Clive, Warren Hastings, and their successors, men for the most part bred in factories and trained to habits of business. Among the sons of attorneys we find Edmund Burke, Smeaton the engineer, Scott and Wordsworth, and Lords Somers, Hardwicke, and Dunning. Sir William Blackstone was the posthumous son of a silk mercer. Lord Gifford's father was a grocer at Dover, Lord Denman's a physician, Judge Telford's a country brewer, and Lord Chief Baron Pollux a celebrated saddler at Charing Cross. Layard, the discoverer of the monuments of Nineveh, was an articled clerk in a London solicitor's office, and Sir William Armstrong, the inventor of hydraulic machinery and of the Armstrong Ordinance, were also trained to the law and practiced for some time as an attorney. Milton was the son of a London Scrivener, and Pope and Southey were the sons of linen drapers. Professor Wilson was the son of a Paisley manufacturer, and Lord Macaulay of an African merchant. Keats was a druggist, and Sir Humphrey Davy, a country apothecary's apprentice. Speaking of himself, Davy once said, quote, "What I am, I have made myself. I say this without vanity, and in pure simplicity of the heart." Unquote. Richard Owen, the Newton of natural history, began life as a midshipman, and did not enter upon the line of scientific research in which he has become so distinguished until comparatively late in life. He laid the foundations of his great knowledge, which occupied in cataloging the magnificent museum accumulated by the industry of John Hunter, a work which occupied him at the College of Surgeons during a period of about 10 years. Foreign, not less than English biography, abounds in illustrations of men who have glorified the lot of poverty by their labors and genius. In art we find Claude, the son of a pastry cook, Jeeves of a baker, Leopold Robert of a watchmaker, and Haydn of a wheelwright, whilst Daguerre was a scene painter at the opera. The father of Gregory VII was a carpenter, of Sextus V a shepherd, and of Adrian VI a poor bargeman. When a boy, Adrian, unable to pay for a light by which to study, was accustomed to prepare his lessons by the light of the lamps in the streets and the church porches, exhibiting a degree of patience and industry, which were the certain forerunners of his future distinction. Of like humble origin were Hay, the mineralogist, who was the son of a weaver of Saint Just Haute-Brûlé, the mechanician of a baker at Orleans, Joseph Fourier, the mathematician of a tailor of Auxerre, Durand, the architect of a Paris shoemaker in Gesner, the naturalist of a skinner or a worker in hides at Zurich. This last began his career under all the disadvantages attendant on poverty, sickness, and domestic calamity, none of which, however, were sufficient to damp his courage or hinder his progress. His life was indeed an eminent illustration of the truth of the saying that those who have most to do and are willing to work will find the most time. Pierre Ramus was another man of like character. He was the son of poor parents in Picardy, and when a boy was employed to tend sheep, but, not liking the occupation, he ran away to Paris. After encountering much misery, he succeeded in entering the College of Navarre as a servant. The situation, however, opened for him the road to learning, and he shortly became one of the most distinguished men of his time. End of section 2. Recorded by Meg Ferry 252.